Now, scores of Palestinians were killed in central Gaza after Israel stepped up its strikes on the war-torn region. Another convoy of 17 aid trucks arrived as the Hamas-run territory faces shortages of essentials. There were fresh exchange of fire over Israel's northern border with Lebanon as fears grew that Hezbollah, a close ally of Hamas and Iran, could enter the ongoing war. With the violence raging unchecked, Iran said that the region could spiral out of control. Apart from funding Hamas, Israel's arch-foe backs Hezbollah in Lebanon. Washington warned that any actors looking to inflame the ongoing war, it said that it would not hesitate to act in the event of any escalation. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a stark warning to Lebanon's Hezbollah, saying that getting involved would be the mistake of its life.
שאתם עושים פה ומה ששמעתי עכשיו מהמפקדים שלכם זה דבר חשוב מאין כמוהו. אתם הורגים אנשי חיזבאללה שמנסים לתקוף את קו החזית שלנו. אני לא יודע עכשיו, כשאני נמצא איתכם, אני לא יכול להגיד לכם כרגע אם חיזבאללה יחליט להיכנס בצורה מלאה למלחמה. אם חיזבאללה יחליט להיכנס למלחמה, הוא יתגעגע למלחמת לבנון השנייה. הוא יעשה את טעות חייו. ואנחנו נכה בו בעוצמה שהוא לא יכול אפילו לדמיין. והמשמעות לו ולמדינת לבנון היא הרסנית. אבל אנחנו ערוכים לכל תרחיש.
Well, the Gaza officials say that the central town of Deir al-Balah had been particularly badly hit overnight on Saturday to Sunday. The ministry said that at least 80 people had been killed in the overnight raids on central Gaza, which destroyed more than 30 homes. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees said that 29 of its staff had been killed since the start of the war, saying that half of them were teachers. The scale of the bombing has left basic systems unable to function. The UN stated that dozens of unidentified bodies had also been buried in a mass grave in Gaza City because cold storage had run out. The UN says that Gaza needs 100 trucks per day to meet the needs of 2.4 million residents. That is, before the current hostilities erupted, the daily average used to be about 500 trucks a day. And so far, there have been no deliveries of fuel. On Sunday, the chief of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees warned that supplies would run out in 3 days. Philippe Lazarne said, and I'm quoting here, "Without fuel, there will be no water, no functioning hospitals, and aid will not reach any civilians in desperate need." The Hamas group said that 165,000 housing units, half of those in the entire Gaza Strip, had been destroyed in the raids. Meanwhile, an Israeli soldier was killed near the Gaza border by an anti-tank missile fired by militants inside the enclave there. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant warned that the war with Hamas could take months. Speaking to Sky News, Israeli President Isaac Herzog said that the Israeli Defense Forces found Hamas files with instructions for making chemical weapons. Experts say it is not clear whether Hamas had any serious or operational plan for using makeshift chemical weapons or whether the group had attempted to produce them.
This is material which was found on the body of one of those sadistic villains. It's Al-Qaeda material, official Al-Qaeda material. We're dealing with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hamas. This is what we're dealing with. And in this material, there were instructions how to produce chemical weapons. It speaks about arson, and it speaks about various chemicals that come out and produce chemical weapons.
With fears growing that the war could spread, Israel admitted accidentally hitting an Egyptian border post. Tel Aviv apologized for the incident, which Egypt said had left an unspecified number of border guards with minor injuries. Well, Pope Francis used his weekly prayer in Rome to plead for an end to the bloodshed. He said, and I'm quoting him here, "War is always a defeat. It is a destruction of humanity. Brothers, please stop." He later held a 20-minute conversation with US President Joe Biden about the war situation in and also the need to identify paths to peace. The US president later discussed the war with the leaders of Britain, Canada, France, Germany and Italy. He also held talks with Netanyahu. In Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron's office announced that he would be traveling to Israel on Tuesday for talks with the Israeli Prime Minister. The demonstrators marched in several European capitals on Sunday.
In Berlin Molotow cocktails wiederhören.
And for more on this, joining us live is Anthony Lewinston, who is an independent journalist and the author of the Palestine Laboratory. He's joining us live from Bali. Thank you so much for joining us from WION, Lewinston.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right. Now, Lewinston, the US has beefed up military assets and troops in West Asia, most of them on a high alert as well. The war has been going on for, we're in the 17th day. I want to seek your assessment that will we see any active US participation?
Well, we certainly hope not, because the current conflict between Israel and Hamas is bad enough, which obviously is killing huge amounts of Palestinians in Gaza, causing mass destruction within Gaza and, of course, also harming people in Israel as well. The US presence there, of course, is vital for Israel because Israel fears, and I would argue so does the US, of a potential another front. So if, say, Hezbollah gets seriously involved from Lebanon, it's arguable whether Israel is even able to manage that on its own. And I say that because since Netanyahu has been Israeli Prime Minister in the last year or so, a bit less than a year now, a lot of evidence suggests that the military in Israel has been degraded hugely, and a lot of people are deeply concerned, in fact, even in the last 2 weeks, that the military actually is not capable of fighting one war, let alone two. In other words, one with Gaza and one with Hezbollah. And the US presence there, I guess, is partly as almost like a quasi-shield for the US. But the idea of the US getting actively involved in a war zone is the worst possible outcome, because if that happens, Hezbollah potentially is involved, and also Iran, which would be potentially a massive regional war, something we all want to avoid.
Absolutely, Mr. Lewinston. I was just coming to the point you made there of Hezbollah actively getting involved in the war, and especially with the violence, the war between Israel and Hamas militants raging unchecked, especially with fire exchanges on the Israel's northern border with Lebanon. There are fears that Hezbollah could enter the conflict, the point that you made there, and there are also growing concerns of a multi-pronged war.
Look, one of the things I think that Hezbollah probably is doing is testing Israel's defences on the north around Lebanon to see how active they are, how possible they are to potentially get involved with Israel longer term. And Iran is probably sitting back now thinking to itself that they're in a relatively good position, namely that they had some involvement. We don't know exactly what. They have funded Hamas in the past. We don't know if they had any direct involvement in the recent Hamas attack on Israel. And Iran, in fact, is trying to have a much more bigger role in the Middle East. I would suggest that Iran does not want a regional war because militarily they arguably will not win against America. But even talking about that, the prospect of that is so catastrophic that this has to be de-escalated. There needs to be some kind of massive pressure on Israel, the US and other players here to have a ceasefire in Gaza, because otherwise, ultimately, what Israel is moving towards, I fear, is what they wrongly perceive is a military solution to what's happening in Gaza. There is no military solution. You can destroy Gaza, you can try to remove huge amounts of Hamas infrastructure and its people, but then what? There is no real plan. There was a Reuters report a few days ago interviewing huge numbers of Israeli officials anonymously.
Yes.
And the conclusion was exactly this. There is no plan if and when Hamas is overthrown, which is a disturbing thought.
Absolutely, Mr. Lewinston. You speak of how there is no plan about when this war will come to an end. We've also seen various leaders visiting Israel and also holding talks with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Who do you think is able to, at the moment, go forward with the de-escalation of the ongoing war?
Well, most of the countries that are sending people to Israel are not interested in de-escalation. I'm talking about Joe Biden or the British Prime Minister or other leaders from most Western countries. There is seemingly no interest in de-escalation. In fact, they're seemingly supporting almost uncritically Israel's brutal, arguably genocidal war against Gaza and its people there. This is what's so disturbing. Where are those serious voices? To me, it is logical, hard to acknowledge that there needs to be engagement with Hamas. Now is the time to talk to your enemies. You don't have to like your enemies or even embrace them. You need to talk to Hamas. You need to find some way to get through this, because military solutions in Gaza, having spent